In short, it's how does the brain make a decision? You know, in that phrase, neuroeconomics, economics is really a synonym for risk. And so what happens in the brain as it's like evaluating a situation, judging the probabilities, and making a risk decision? The interesting thing is when I first started studying it 15 or so years ago, they were showing that you had to have emotion to make a risk decision. And of course, like I already kind of knew that from my psychoanalysis study and even from being a trader, but to hear them say it. And then in the interim 15 years, it's been more and more detail about what happens in the brain as you perceive, judge, and decide, you know, in the unknown, right? So,
and what trends or updates have you been tracking in the field lately?
yeah, the thing that I think is the most interesting is something that the researchers call anticipated affect, meaning, you know, the feeling you anticipating you will feel. And the really ubiquitous role that anticipated affect plays in our perception and judgment. So on the cognitive side of things, there's also a lot of work going on showing that the model of the brain is prediction. That we're always predicting what's going to happen, both on a cognitive level and on an affective level, which I'll come back to, but based on everything we've learned, all of our past experience. Like, you don't know this right now because it's so in the unconscious, but you're literally predicting the next word that's going to come out of my mouth based on your familiarity with the English language. And we're always doing that. And this has been shown in lots of different experiments. But the most interesting piece for me, and I actually think for the world, is that we're predicting a feeling. So for example, there was a study done at Stanford, it was really a meta-analysis done at Stanford, showing people probability distribution, you know, the normal curve or a skewed curve. And they could really show that the very first thing that was happening in the brain was the predicting of a feeling. So like with a normal curve, you know, things are going to work out normally with normal sort of probabilities. The brain seems to be predicting calm. And with some sort of skewed distribution, predicting anxiety. And this was over 610 brain scans. I can't remember how many exact studies because it was a meta-analysis. That was 2012, actually. But just recently, I asked one of the researchers at Stanford, Brian Knutson, who's, by the way, big in the Society for Neuroeconomics. I said, Brian, I knew the answer to this, but I wanted to hear him say it. I said, like, how pervasive is this anticipated affect? And he said, well, it's ubiquitous. If you don't have it, you die. So I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty pervasive. Like, seems sort of black and white. It makes sense to a lot of people, but it also doesn't make sense. Like, how is it that you're predicting not only what I'm going to say, but how it's going to make you feel? This is
what
how
are the ways? Go ahead, sorry.
This is like sort of how confirmation bias takes place, and how we continue to, you know, we continue to see evidence for what we already believe, right? Because if we're looking at some situation and we're trying to be objective, but if we're really objective, it threatens like our worldview, then you know, that creates a feeling of threat, and so like we don't want to go there, right? It feels insecure to predict something different than we already think. It feels threatening. So we tend to not see it. We tend to see the stuff that proves what we already believe, which is obviously like, you know, instructive when it comes to like the world of politics or religion or.
So, yeah, you partly just there answered the question I was going to follow up with, which is what are the ways that you think about anticipated affect with respect to performance when working with individuals, both in terms of how it can cause issues and potentially how it can be leveraged to improve performance?
So what I find all the time is there's a conflict. Like, part of the person believes they can do something and believes they can accomplish something, you know, and reach a higher, newer goal. And some part of them isn't so sure. But sometimes they're really aware of the part that's not so sure. You know, people's level of awareness is all over the board, right? But helping them realize they actually have a conflict and they should accept the conflict and understand it, as opposed to what everybody tries to do, which is just suppress the part that doesn't support the idea they can do it. You know, so they want to be positive, they want to be optimistic, they want to be confident, you know they have to believe. And they're afraid of looking at any part of themselves that is the opposite of that in any way. You know, fear, concern, worry, doubt. They're afraid of anything of the so-called negative. Well, the way I work actually is to help people realize all of their thoughts and feelings, but believe it or not, particularly their negative thoughts and feelings that they're afraid of, because they are afraid of them and it gets in their way unconsciously. But when I'm able to help them, like when I'm able to help them shine, why can I say that?
It's all good.
But I am able to help them shine sunshine there. And like we end up neutralizing the negative. I mean, the first thing that tends to happen is they just didn't even realize they had a conflict. Like, and I'll tell you, usually it comes in the form of self-criticism. You know, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, I'm not doing enough of this, I'm not doing enough of that. And then I help them see, like, there is actually some emotionally logical reason why they're not doing as much of this or not doing as much of that. That while that emotional logic may not get them to the goal, it does have some like meaning to them personally. And then once they see that and accept it, they're actually usually able to turn that energy and use it to help them further their goals. But in a certain sort of way, almost the more important thing that happens is it just doesn't get in their way anymore. Because when they try to suppress it, it also, you know, it has a tendency to come out at the worst moment.
A phrase I've always loved, which you're reminding me of, is the idea that awareness alone is curative, and that bringing patterns, beliefs, negative behaviors, whatever it may be, into awareness, as you're saying, it may not solve the problem, but it gives you a starting point.
There is something to awareness alone, if it's accurate. Like I always tell people, the superpower is to be able to answer the question, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? Which is a simple question, really, except it's totally not easy to answer. And the torque, the leverage, is in getting the answers right. I really am, you know, frustrated with this, or afraid of that, or disappointed about that. And I am those things because of whatever, X, Y, and Z. There is some like magic bullet in getting the why right. So someone can have a feeling that seems to be very disruptive. Now, I'll tell you that like it probably is very disruptive, and then there's some other way to handle it, but I'm gonna come back to that. But if they get the instigator of that feeling right, oftentimes it's just like poof, it doesn't bother them anymore. They're like, oh yeah, I am mad that my coach didn't take it seriously when, you know, or I am upset. I mean, since I deal with so many hedge fund guys, you know, I am mad at myself that, you know, I cut the euro and would have made, you know, $4.2 billion if I hadn't done that. Like, I tell people all the time, those fears, frustrations, and disappointments in their pure form have some message for you. Like when you're disappointed of your performance, the message is supposed to be you're uncomfortable, so you figure out what you could have done better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like usually when people are afraid, I mean, there's some seed of something to be afraid of, even if it's just failure. Like in its pure form, it's cautionary, or, you know, how I say, none of us would have graduated from college if we didn't have some fear. Like, you know, we only ever did any homework because we didn't want to get in trouble, right? So I think it's all about a totally different understanding of those so-called negative emotions, and then being able to separate the predictions that are irrelevant and like are just from your past experience from the ones that you want to be able to have, or that are giving you information that in a perfect world you both need and can use, if that makes any sense. I realize
Absolutely,
it's a bit esoteric.
No, the way that Stephen likes to describe emotions is as signaling mechanisms, meaning, you know, they're usually an indicator that something needs to be done or some action needs to be taken. When someone's having paralyzing rumination, it's likely because they need to have a conversation that they're avoiding having, for example. I want to back up just a little bit, Denise, and ask you about the work you do in general. And also, I want to touch on the TV show Billions, because a lot of people I know you through that. So could you tell us two things? One, about how you describe the work you do and who you do it with. And then could you give us a little bit of background on how the character Wendy Roades ended up being built around you and your work within the TV show Billions, and how that all came about?
Yeah. How I think of my work is solve the unsolvable, not to sound egomaniacal or anything. But I really do think of it that way. Like the mental blocks that people get into that the kind of standard zeitgeist in psychology doesn't quite address. Like the problems that people almost solve, but don't solve, particularly don't solve through cognition, don't solve through trying to change their thoughts or change their focus. So I'm like, let's figure out what's really going on for that person emotionally in whatever challenge they're facing. And I'm, you know, when 90-some% of the people, if we figure out what's really going on emotionally, which oftentimes isn't what the person thinks, we reveal the block in sort of Stephen's signaling way. And the block will have meaning. I